Okay, welcome to the podcast. I've got a very special guest here, a good friend of mine for many, many, many years, and a friend who also studied martial arts with me. He is a certified or ordained orthodox rabbi.
Yes, sir.
Right? And we're going to talk about something that I think is really, really interesting. And he doesn't know exactly what questions I'm going to ask, but I want to kind of get to the bottom of the religious significance, importance, and such of dogs in the Bible, right? There has to be some place in the Bible that talks about dogs and talks about maybe not the importance, but of how they relate. I know there's the one story in Israel, in Egypt, which we'll talk about. But Rabbi Kravitz is an Orthodox rabbi, but he's also an amazing warrior, not only for the souls of Jews and the souls of Noahites and everything and people everywhere, but he is a reserve. Can I say about being a reserve?
Let's not say which department.
Okay,
but a reserve police officer.
A reserve police officer. He is a Krav Maga instructor.
Not an instructor, but introductory instructor.
Instructor, and he's trained martial arts with me. He's a warrior. In other words, he's not
firearms instructor.
Firearms instructor. That's what we want to talk about. And I've taken tactical shooting lessons with you. I think you're an amazing instructor. So if that counts for anything, I think that's really important. But we're going to talk a little bit more about biblical stuff, and we may touch into some stuff on shooting as well, or self-defense as well, because it's very, very important in our society nowadays. And we're going to stay politically incorrect. Well, we may be politically incorrect, but we're not going to be politically divisive. We're not going to talk about.
No, we don't want to do that.
We don't want to do that.
And by the way, any of the things that we talk about,
yeah.
As you say, a warrior, it's really only self-defense.
Correct. Yeah. We nothing is ever. And again, when I taught martial arts, there was nothing assertive. It was always reactive or responsive to a threat.
Right, and you have to evaluate the circumstances and use what's responsible.
Right. Yeah, that's
the problem in our society today are so many people are not balancing their reaction based on responsibility.
Right, and that's a really important piece to think about too. So now let's talk about, first of all, dogs or all animals in the Bible. When we say the Bible, I'm going to kind of, people always say the New Testament, the Old Testament. What I don't like about that personally, and I was raised Catholic, right? But it kind of connotates that the Old Testament is like my old shoes, and the New Testament is like my new Air Jordans. And I don't like that. I think personally, as a person who believes, I have a very, very strong faith in God, but I believe it's the Hebrew scriptures and then whatever came afterwards, the Christian scriptures or the...
We sometimes call it the Jewish scriptures.
Okay, the Jewish scriptures.
Right.
So what we're going to talk about today, and although Rabbi Kravitz is very well versed in the Christian scriptures as well, which you wouldn't believe, but we're going to talk about mainly the Jewish scriptures.
Correct.
Okay. So in the Jewish scriptures, let's start first of all with animals in general. We'll get to the dogs.
Well, I think, first of all, the Jewish scriptures, which is also known as the Torah,
mm-hmm.
and the broader, larger size of it is called the Tanakh,
mm-hmm.
really cares very much for treating animals with dignity
mm-hmm.
and respect.
Yeah.
You have to put it in the context of when it was written,
mm-hmm.
and how the rest of the world was treating animals. And then when you evaluate how the Torah instituted rules and regulations,
mm-hmm.
it was so advanced.
Yeah.
But more so even today.
Mm.
So, for example, you were forbidden, if you were plowing a field, to mix two different types of animals, which would cause, let's say you put an ox and a horse.
Mm-hmm.
You weren't allowed to do that, even if that was all you owned.
Mm-hmm.
Because look at the strain it would put on the horse, because
right.
it didn't have the same strength as an ox.
Wow. Who would think that?
Who would think that their monetary gain that they would get from plowing the field
mm-hmm.
need to be put secondary
mm-hmm.
to treating the animal in a respectful manner?
Right. That's huge.
It's not just huge, it was revolutionary
mm-hmm.
at the time.
I mean, this is before any kind of humane society or any kind of anything.
There was before anything,
right.
to realize to do that, and then I hate on your publication here, your broadcast
mm-hmm.
to mention, but in ancient times, the cruelest thing that could be ever described being in maltreatment of any animal, it's mind-boggling what they would do. So they would actually, because there was no refrigeration, and let's say you were going to kill a cow, for example, to eat, you have no way of killing it and then refrigerating it. So they would cut a part of the animal off and use a tourniquet of sorts to keep it from bleeding to death and keep it alive while they did that. This is called in Hebrew aver min achai, a limb from a living animal.
Right. And that's forbidden.
That is a law in the Torah, in the Jewish scripture, that is actually not only forbidden for the Jewish people, but it's written for all mankind. It is in my mind, the worst example of maltreatment of an animal. And if you didn't value an animal's life, then you treat it like a possession that you can do whatever you want to it.
Right.
But here, when this was a common practice,
and it was
very common.
And how many years ago are we going back from?
We're talking 3,000 years ago.
Okay.
And even 2,000 years ago, it was still a common practice.
Wow.
Think about anything that was pre-refrigeration.
Okay.
So, the world was not yet in a mindset to move away to become vegetarian or vegan. That's that's another discussion,
right?
Which we'll touch upon. But even the idea that you should not expose an animal to cruelty was fundamental to Judaism. And on a more moralistic viewpoint, if you treat animals, even a spider or a cockroach, and you don't have reverence for that animal, and only maybe if it endangers your life, you would take extreme stances with it.
Right.
If you, in your mind, can dehumanize someone to that level, then you could rationalize that you could do anything you want to them. So if you feel you can get away with doing it to an animal, and you look at your enemy as being like an animal, you're going to treat them like that. But no, not even, and I don't mean that in a pejorative way, but an animal's not allowed to be treated in a way that's cruel and unusual, and I take that as very, very forward thinking.
I do too.
Of Judaism, especially when you put it in the context of when it was written.
Yeah. So when the original Torah or the Hebrew scriptures or Jewish scriptures were written, we're going back to the time of Moses.
Right.
And that's when the 10 Commandments were given and all that, and that was all on Mount Sinai.
Right. But even the law of not eating the limb of a living animal, which is, I can't even say it.
It's horrible.
I can't even say it.
I know.
That goes back another 1,000 years even before Moses.
Oh, it does.
In the stories of Abraham and Noah. But so 3,000 years ago?
Yeah, wow.
Put that into context of what the world did.
Yeah.
And that Judaism was so advanced to say, no, this is forbidden.
But there's also the context, because you keep saying Judaism, but there's also the ability for non-Jews to observe these laws. In other words, these laws were given for anybody who really wants to obey them, right?
So incorporated within the Jewish scripture is a covenant for non-Jews. We're one of the religions that does not believe that we have the only path to God. We believe that all mankind also has a path. So based on the principles of how a person should live their life from the times of Adam and Abraham and Noah, it's formulated 7 fundamental principles of how to live your life based on a belief that these are divinely given. One of the principles is not to steal, not to murder, to have a judicial system, to not blaspheme and curse God, to not commit sexual immoral acts. But incorporated here in all of those rules was not to do the most cruel thing that you could imagine to an animal, which is this limb from taking a limb from a living animal. But it was expanded. That's a principle. But within that principle is not to be cruel for animals. There's another example in the Torah, in the Jewish scripture. Let's say a person wants to go and eat eggs from a nest, take eggs.
Okay.
Can you imagine? You have to shoo away the mother bird
Right.
before you take those, so you shouldn't cause emotional distress to the mother bird.
Wow. That's great. That's so deep.
It is so deep.
Yeah.
Now, I can understand for a person that is vegan
Yeah.
or vegetarian,
Right.
and they say, okay, let's just not eat the eggs.
Right.
But listen, not every vegetarian is not eating eggs.
Absolutely.
Right?
Yeah.
You have to be vegan to do
Yeah,
that.
yeah.
But to think that I should be so careful
Right.
to not cause emotional trauma.
I mean, even emotional, not even physical.
No, yeah, that's
Yeah,
the point.
yeah, yeah,
So
deep.
when you start expanding and look at all these dimensions,
Mm-hmm.
you see that this concept of respect toward animals
Mm-hmm.
has to be valued and taken seriously.
Yeah.
When you talk about dogs, are not spoken about too much in Jewish scripture.
Right.
There is a statement that if you had food that was forbidden for you to eat,
Okay.
that the privilege of who you would give it to, rather than just charging it, would
Yeah.
be first and foremost to dogs.
Oh, okay.
And there's what's called a midrashic, which is more of an allegorical story in Judaism, that when the Jews were in Egypt and they were preparing to flee,
Right.
and there was death going on the dogs did not sound an alarm to warn the Egyptians.
Right.
And they had that sensitivity of the need to help the Jews escape from slavery.
Right.
Because of that type of sensitivity, they were rewarded and told, this food that you're going to discard, first offer it to the animals.
Wow. Okay. And so those were the dogs all over Egypt.
Yes.
When the Jews were
Yes.
doing the Exodus.
All the dogs. It was miraculous that they didn't do this.
Right.
But I like to take the miraculous and to kind of put it into a somewhat practical, moralistic view, that they sensed something.
Yeah. And dogs do sense a lot. I mean, that's, and I think a lot of animals have this spiritual thing. And I mean, it's always in religious, they say that there's no animal that's like a human, right? Or the human is the only animal that has a soul.
Well, animals do have a soul.
Okay, so let's touch on that.
Animals have a soul. Every living being has a soul.
Okay.
And even inanimate objects have some kind of spiritual force that causes it to exist.
Okay.
What we differentiate between animals and human beings is that the ultimate ability to have freedom of choice and to make those type of spiritual choices between right and wrong without it being based on reward or punishment.
Okay.
That is a uniquely human characteristic. That would be what distinguishes. Unfortunately, there are many humans that don't live up to that potential.
Right.
And there are many dogs or animals that are highly intelligent, that are maybe even more surpass those lower human beings.
Yeah.
The distinction
I
is,
love that.
the distinction here is that since we are innately given that higher potential,
right.
You're going to love this one, Robert.
Okay.
When we don't live up to that potential and we act like a base animal that's just, eating to eat,
right.
we become lower than the animal.
According to the Bible?
Yes.
Really?
Especially Jewish. Why? Because we have the potential to do it on a higher level and we don't live up to our own potential.
Wow. Okay, that's amazing. Okay, so because I want to go a different way with this.
Okay.
Because this is so fascinating. Because I've always been told, and again, I've studied religion since before you and I met. I've always read, I've read the Torah, the Tanakh, I've read some parts of the Talmud. I've read part of the Quran. I've read the Hebrew, the Christian scriptures. So the Bhagavad Gita. I've read all this different stuff. But what I think is really missing and a lot of Christian teaching too. They always talk about, you do X, Y, and Z and you go to heaven, right? But what we never got to the bottom of is this whole idea, like there is obviously an afterlife, a heaven or something like that. What is the Jewish belief or let's say just the religious belief behind the Bible of animals. Like if I have a dog, I love my dog.
So all dogs go to heaven. Like that. This uniquely godly soul that human beings have,
Okay.
that is the part that goes to heaven.
Okay.
Now, human beings have actually two souls.
Okay.
We have what's called an animalistic soul that causes us to have the same passions as any animal.
Okay.
The desire to eat, the desire to procreate, the desire to seek pleasure.
Okay.
It's
Sure.
just
Sure. It's animalistic.
You can't, and it's not necessarily bad or good.
Absolutely.
It can be used for good.
Right.
All those things I just listed could all be done for good, or
Right.
they could all be used for evil and bad.
Right.
The goal is to use all those things for goodness.
Okay.
But those are our base animalistic desires, just
Okay.
like any other animal.
Right.
We're part of the animal kingdom.
Of course.
That part of the soul after a human being dies, that part of the soul does not get the same spiritual elevation to a higher realm
Okay.
as the godly soul. Okay. So whether or not the animal soul within an animal goes to this higher spiritual realm, I'm not sure.
Okay.
I don't think it has the same type of experience as the godly soul.
Right.
But to rule out that the essence of that animal, whatever gave it life, ceases to exist, doesn't make sense even from a scientific basis.
Right. I agree with you.
Because as Einstein said, energy cannot be destroyed.
Right.
So there's some force there.
Yeah.
There's something causing and animating it. Where that force goes, I may not have the answer to that. But that it would completely cease to exist, it doesn't make sense. It exists within creation somehow.
Right. It came from somewhere.
It came from somewhere.
It has to go somewhere.
It has to go from somewhere. Where it goes, I don't think the Torah focuses that much on where that force of the animal goes.
I think it's a good place we should do more investigation.
I may not have the answer.
Yeah, but we can find out. But the idea is, so you're saying that the human has two souls, the animalistic soul and the more godly soul.
Right.
And what about animals, like let's say a dog who does therapy work or serves a blind person or serves a handicapped person or a military dog who saves the lives of people? Do you think, and I hate to make you think what God might think, but you'd be the only person that I would ever go to for this question. Do you think God might say, well, you know what, maybe that animalistic soul is partnered with somewhat of a spiritual soul, and maybe that dog should go to heaven?
I think that, from my understanding, is that we know there are different animals that are much more refined than other animals.
For sure.
There's some animals that no matter what you do, you cannot domesticate it.
Yeah.
It's just impossible.
For sure.
They're wild beings.
Right.
No one can think of domesticating a great white shark.
Shark, yeah. I agree.
You can't.
Right.
But do we necessarily classify what a great white shark does as evil? If I fall off a boat and it attacks and kills me,
it's not evil.
It's not evil. It's natural.
Right.
But if that great white shark had a godly soul,
right,
which gave it the ability to choose between right and wrong,
right,
then if it attacked me and killed me,
it would be wrong.
It would be wrong.
Right.
Killing is only justified in self-defense.
So can that part of we're
or self-defense or for
sure
for survival,
pleasure.
No, I wouldn't even say for pleasure. Killing is not for pleasure,
unless you're eating it.
Yeah, but that's for survival.
Oh, I see. Okay, got it. Okay. Because I say dogs have two drives. They have the sex drive and the pack drive and the prey drive.
Okay.
Right. The desire to procreate and everything like that, and then the prey drive of eating and killing and protecting themselves. They're two different drives, and one drives the dog a lot more than the other. And I think all animals have that soul.
Yes.
But we make a choice. I'd prefer not to rob that person and take the food out of the refrigerator. Right. I prefer to go buy it.
I can make altruistic choices.
Right.
So. Animals, there are some animals that are much more refined.
Right.
Some animals that are much more intelligent. You can't compare your beautiful dogs to a goldfish.
No.
In terms of intelligence.
For sure not.
Even though, if you remember, I used to have a fish in my house,
Yeah.
and I could actually put my finger in the water, and it would come over and let me pet it.
Yeah.
I still can't believe it.
Yeah, but it's conditioning also.
Yes,
right.
so true. And that's the part about it. A lot of what animals do, even the ones that are making these choices to be kind and to do things, it is part of a conditioning that are based on the drives that they have.
Right.
They're conditioned and they're trained.
Yeah,
First and foremost, we have to train our animal souls
for sure.
to act properly.
Yeah.
The only distinction with us is that we are held to a higher standard because we have that freedom of choice that we were given.
That's like the Hebrew national slogan. They're held to a higher standard.
We are held to a
Right.
higher standard.
Yeah. But I think also through this domestication process, and the people, it's so varying. They say 10,000 years they've been domesticating dogs, but I do think that through this domestication process, that now animals, they say once you get into, I think, 10 different offspring, then the traits are more inheritative in the dog, and so maybe the animal is starting to get a more refined soul or a polished soul?
Well, I would say a more refined animal soul.
Okay, I'll go with
Because
that.
ultimately, in Jewish philosophy, our goal is to refine the world.
Okay,
The world is very crass
it is, I agree.
and coarse. And when we use it for goodness and kindness, we refine it. So if we use our money in a wasteful manner, in an unkind manner, then the money is coarse. But if we use that money in an appropriate way, and we take a portion of it to help other people that are in need, to give charity to causes like yours.
Or yours. We're going to give a link for Rabbi Kravitz.
Okay,
too.
thank you very much. But it refines it. So part of the mission that Judaism sees us is to refine the world. So yes, I would say that we're animals. Let's say dogs. Dogs at one time were used to hunt people.
Yeah, some still are.
Okay, horribly.
Yeah. Well, I mean, like military.
Well, I'm
dogs,
not even
right?
talking military.
you're
where
talking- okay.
I'm talking about for sport.
Oh, really? Okay. Well,
I think there was a time when
Probably.
when animals were used to hunt foxes, but some societies would actually make it into a sport to send a slave off and
Yeah.
have the dogs chase down a slave and kill the slave, and it was sport to them. That is using the animal in the most crass way.
Yeah.
But when we refine an animal and say we've refined this animal to be a service dog,
right.
as we were talking about even before the broadcast.
Yep.
That's refining the tendencies and the natures. And it just dawned on me just a second. If anyone wants to even question whether the mission that Judaism speaks about, refining the world, is even possible, just looking at how the domestication of dogs to not simply be tame, but to be kind and to offer emotional support demonstrates that we are able to refine the physical world.
Yeah.
But we need to expand that to all aspects of our life. That's what Judaism's saying.
I agree. So talking about this whole thing, so I think the dogs, and we're kind of just, again, the whole thing of animals and the not eating it, that's horrible, eating a limb from an animal. So in the Jewish law, you have these kosher laws, and one of them I think really mainly is in place to protect animals. That if you're going to eat an animal, and I was a vegetarian for a long time, I'm not anymore, but if you're going to eat animals, I always like to think of not falling under the laws, is I try to get a cow that was pasture raised, that had a nice life before it was killed, or a chicken or anything like that, because I do think on factory farms and all that, which I'm not going to get into here, it's wrong. So when we're talking about the law, and I want to talk about this, that we should be kind to our animals. Our animals are our possessions, and we should treat them morally. We should give them shelter and good food and training. And I do believe that in training our dogs, we give them the ability to be better members of society. But some people train their animals, whether it's cocks or dogs or anything, to do this horrible fighting stuff, which I'm so against. I think it's just horrible. But other side of it, we teach our dogs to be protection dogs, like police dogs and military dogs, where they help protect innocent people. They help protect a police officer by sending the dog in, because the dog can get in and do less lethal damage, which is the legal term, and extract a person out without a person going in there. And we do often hope and pray that the policemen, and I think they always try to make that decision, if the person has a gun, they would never send a dog in. That would never happen. But do you feel like, from somewhat of a religious or spiritual standpoint, that these trainings on the dog helps them to kind of elevate them beyond the, not your goldfish, but like the average goldfish?
Right. You know, self-defense in general is an intricate part of Jewish belief.
Okay.
We know that the Bible, the book of Exodus, actually talks about a situation that if someone breaks into your home and you need to defend yourself because you feel your life is threatened, and you kill that person in self-defense, that is not considered murder.
Okay.
And there is a distinction between murder and killing.
Okay, so let's talk about that, because that's the Ten Commandments says,
Right.
"Thou shalt not murder."
Right.
It does not
it's,
say.
What's interesting, it's translated, you know, I remember when people were debating whether the Ten Commandments should be up at courthouses,
Okay.
and all these extreme right evangelicals were fighting for that.
Right.
But the Ten Commandments that they were showing said, "Thou shalt not kill."
Right.
But that's not what the Hebrew says.
Right.
It says, "Thou shalt not murder."
Murder.
Because there is an exception for killing, even a human life,
Right.
if they are coming to kill you.
Okay.
And you have to evaluate. There has to have been no other alternative
Right.
for protecting yourself. And I thought that was very insightful of you, that using a police dog is a way of avoiding the ultimate lethal force of taking a life. That's
Yeah.
a big responsibility and should never be taken lightly.
Yeah.
So self-defense in Judaism is a fundamental principle,
Right.
but it's not a carte blanche that just say, okay, I feel this person wants to hurt me, so I can kill them.
Right.
No, I have to look what other methodologies do I have. We have the same thing in legal standing in law.
Sure.
You're not allowed to use lethal force unless there was a lethal threat against you.
Yeah.
It has to be a measured threat.
Yeah.
So this is something, again, if you go back 2,000 or 3,000 years ago,
Yeah.
who cared?
Right.
Who cared? But we care.
Yeah. Well, I think that's important, because, you know, self-defense, I mean, I was a bodyguard for years. I taught hand-to-hand combat. I don't talk about much about it on my podcast or my stuff, because I talk mainly about dogs. And you and I worked out a lot, and you taught me defensive shooting. And, you know, in society today, and, you know, we talk about this alt-right and the far left and all this stuff. You know, I do think, and this always gets me in trouble, but I don't really care. I do think there's a place for God in society. You know, and I'm going to just leave it at that. But talking about self-defense, people should have the right to have, you know, a moment of prayer or something like that. And, you know, I think when those things are stripped away from us, then the next thing they strip away from us, now they're trying to ban electric collars on dogs. And, you know, I think using an electric collar on a dog in a humane fashion is a very fair thing to do to the dog. But you have these people on the extreme sides, left or right, I don't care, but they're trying to ban the tool. Right, and that takes away our ability to do things, and maybe then the people who are banned from using that tool end up using more physical force on the dog than they need to, as opposed to a mild stimulation on the collar. So, I'm not asking you to get on the bandwagon to fight for dog training tools, but on self.
Listen, there has to be balance.
Yeah.
You know, there's a training tool in self-defense where they have simulators that you can shoot at. And the computers are so sophisticated now, based on the laser strike on the screen, it can change the scenario of how the person who is acting changes, because there's multiple, you know, filmings of what it can do.
Right.
But there are some of these tools that actually put a small device that you wear, and if you get shot by the person in the film, and it can sense on you that you were hit, kind of like laser tag,
Wow.
it can induce a small electrical shock
On me.
on you, so you can sensitize yourself that there's consequences, that if you don't take proper cover, or that you do something.
Yeah.
But you can't, it's not like movies where
Right.
you're going to turn it up
Yeah.
so high that you're torturing the person.
Right.
Torture is not acceptable.
Yeah.
You know, on human beings.
Yeah. And I don't think it's in any religion. Well, maybe some religions, but
Right. So I'm saying I think what's being lost is having some guiding code that teaches how to be balanced in what you're doing is very important. Judaism views the Torah and the oral tradition of our sages as that moral code that we try to adhere to.
Right.
And I think it's important for all people to have some kind of moral code that gives them that ability to draw a realistic and practical line.
Yeah. No, I agree. I think that's so important because, see, I'm against the whole crazy, realistic video game shooting thing for kids because I think it desensitizes them. And we see these mass shootings, and I think it has a lot to. I mean, personally, and I'm not going on any facts or anything, but I think if you're constantly shooting in these video games, shooting, then I don't think it's the gun that's the necessary evil thing because you're doing it on your video game the whole time. Right. And then you pick up a gun and you're frustrated and you were bullied, and I was bullied. When I came to this country, I didn't speak the language, but I studied martial arts. My mother didn't say, oh, you're being bullied. She said, well, you get your butt kicked, so I'm going to put you in karate class and you're going to learn karate. And then I learned karate, and that was fine. It was a different society. You're a little bit older than me, but we kind of grew up in that same old school mentality.
There are some studies that actually do show that constant exposure to violent video games can raise people's tendency toward violence, and more importantly than that, their insensitivity toward hurting people, because it becomes like a game. There's a Lieutenant Colonel Dave Grossman, who I don't know if he's still doing it, but he was teaching psychology at West Point, and he quotes it in many of his books about some of these studies. I mean, they're hotly debated, the studies, but they did find some evidence that these active shooters, these young kids, that they practiced on these video games.
Yeah.
And then they go in and they turn off any sense of moral feeling toward the victim, because in a video game there's no real victim. It's just a bunch of electrons that are showing up on a screen and causing an effect within the human being that's doing this, and there's no consequence if that's a real human being. You become desensitized to life. So that whether it comes to a video game or through our own philosophical approach is what we try to avoid. And that's why, going back to animals, treating animals with lack of respect desensitizes us to the value of life.
But there's also that study, and they showed that study, that children who abuse animals are likely to grow up to abuse people or to become murderers or abusers or anything like that. So paralleling that, we should teach our children, and a dog is a great way to do that, to teach them to love an animal, to take care of an animal, I think, a much better. Get your kids to show dogs.
When we were kids, I'm a little older than you, to not tie a string with cans on the tail of the dog. I don't know if you're young enough to.
I never did that.
To did that, not to do it, but to remember to
I never
hear
saw
that.
anybody do it. They did it when people got married, but it was on the car.
But it's an example of something that people got enjoyment out of the suffering of an animal.
And that's not necessarily a physical suffering, but it's an emotional suffering, right?
Also emotional.
And that's huge.
We should be sensitive to the fact that if we're leaving our dogs home, we should make sure that we don't leave music on.
Yeah, that we should leave music on, not that we don't leave music on.
No, but it shouldn't be so loud.
Oh, yeah.
So that it's painful.
Yeah.
So I don't know in your realm what you do about whether leaving some stimulation going on in the house is good for the dogs or not.
I don't.
I don't know either. But it should not be on so loud that it causes the animal pain while you're not there, which you could walk away and say, it's not my problem. I'm not here. We should be sensitive to these things. Being sensitive to life and to our purpose is fundamental to what Judaism's saying.
I love that.
And it's not just about how we treat human beings. It's even about how we take care of our crops. Judaism, 2,000 years ago, was said that after a certain number of years, you shouldn't plant a field anymore to give the land an opportunity to replenish itself.
Wow. Go figure. Judaism has respect for the dirt. which is amazing.
Right. And this can be viewed as how to treat our planet.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and we really do need to focus on that, because
so it's an integral part of what Judaism says. Mm-hmm. But what happens, unfortunately, in Judaism, some people ignore that aspect. Some people focus only on that aspect.
Right.
I believe that the balance is to incorporate both aspects. Yeah. How we interact with mankind, how we interact with our personal self-introspection in our relationship with God, and also in how we relate to the world.
Yeah. And I think that on a really good closing thought, Abraham was the patriarch of Judaism, and Abraham is associated with kindness, right? Yes. And I think kindness is the word that we really should look at in the way we treat our dogs, our fellow beings, our people, irrelevant of who they are, and I think that's one of the things I've learned from you, from our friendship, is that Judaism is very inclusive in that you're not asking people to convert to be Jewish, but you're asking people to be good people.
Yes.
And I think, and what I love about this message, in this podcast today is that, we talked about a lot of different things relating to people and the planet and animals, but the biggest takeaway here, I think, is this idea of kindness, that the world could use a lot more kindness towards each other, towards ourselves. First of all, we should be very kind to ourselves. Then that kindness should stem out from there. We should be kind to our fellow people. And then even what you said, a cockroach, or a mouse. I mean, I always use those live traps to catch my mice, and I put videos on Instagram of me releasing them in the forest. The beach.
So I'll give you an example. If you see a spider in your home, so no one would question whether or not maybe you should kill it or maybe you should try to capture it and put it outside, which could be dangerous. You don't know if the spider, even a non-poisonous spider, can bite you and cause swelling.
I use a glass.
Whatever you do, but to go while you're hiking, and what you would do in your home, which is your safe place,
your domain,
you're not allowed to do, even to a spider, and just kill it for sport. Wow. There's a very famous story of a Hasidic Jewish rabbi who was walking with his son, and the son, without thinking, plucked a leaf off a tree. And the father said, even the tree has a purpose.
Wow.
And to do that for no reason. Now, if you were to take the leaf and you're using it because you want to smell or you want to check the moisture level in it, does it need to be watered?
Right.
But just to not be thinking about it and to destroy something.
And how often do we, on a daily, the leaf is a good metaphor for anything, of not, of saying something mean to a person at the store because you're in a bad mood, right?
And that's how they all tie in.
Yeah.
If we to learn kindness, to talk to people properly, to be not in such a rush in our lives that if someone wants to get in front of us, we don't let them yet while we're driving.
Yeah.
Or with that, we don't hold the door open for someone.
Right.
Because we think we're so important.
Yeah.
We're just here for a very short period of time.
Yeah.
And we have to use that time to make ourselves into the most refined human being that we can be. Yeah. And one of the ways to do that is to humble ourselves. And when you humble yourself, you tend to be kinder toward other people.
When we humble ourselves, we're kinder to other people. That's really beautiful.
We tend to be kinder to the other people.
I always say, just when I'm walking around during the day, it's just smile at someone. I mean, people think you're a weirdo, but but share a smile. Hold the door for somebody. Say, like sometimes I'll compliment, those are nice shoes or something. Because if I can take a little bit of my day and just make somebody's day a tiny bit better, then I'm going to have a better day.
Absolutely.
So anyway, this was a great chat. Rabbi Bentzion Kravitz, a good friend of mine, a warrior, a spiritual warrior as well as a physical warrior. We've been friends for, probably close to 20 years. Yeah. So I'm really happy to have him, and I think there's a lot of great information that we can take away from this as a spiritual podcast of biblical proportions, I'd say. Right?
Thank you very much for having me.
Yeah, thanks for being here.
Okay. It's always my pleasure.
Okay. So I'm going to end the podcast and tell you, be sure to check out my website, Robert Cabral, a lot of great dog training stuff on there. Follow me on social media and share the podcast, share the message, and do something great for your dog today. And actually, do something great for somebody else today. Just give them a smile or something. I'll see you next week. Take care.